Sarah Martinez stepped off the bus at Fort Richardson Military Training Base with her duffel bag slung over her shoulder and determination etched across her face. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty parade ground, where dozens of new recruits were gathering for what would be the most challenging 8 weeks of their lives. At 22 years old, Sarah had dreamed of this moment since she was a little girl, watching her grandfather's old war movies. The other recruits around her looked nervous, excited, or both. Some were tall and muscular, others lean and quick-looking. Sarah fell somewhere in the middle at average height with an athletic build, from years of running track in high school and college. What made her stand out wasn't her size or strength, but the quiet confidence in her dark eyes and the way she carried herself with purpose. "Listen up, maggots." The voice cut through the morning air like a knife. Drill Sergeant Williams emerged from the administrative building, his uniform crisp and his posture ramrod straight. Behind him followed 2 other drill sergeants, each looking equally intimidating. "You have exactly 30 seconds to form 3 lines. Move it." Chaos erupted as 47 recruits scrambled to organize themselves. Sarah quickly found her place in the middle line, standing at attention as she had practiced countless times in the mirror at home. Around her, she could hear whispered conversations and nervous laughter from some of the other recruits. "You think this is funny?" Drill Sergeant Williams approached a group of young men who had been snickering. "Drop and give me 20 push-ups right now." His voice echoed across the courtyard, and the laughter died instantly. As the morning progressed, the recruits were assigned to their barracks and given their initial equipment. Sarah found herself in Barrack C with 11 other women. The moment she walked into the long room lined with bunk beds, she could feel the eyes of her bunkmates sizing her up. "So where are you from?" asked Jessica, a tall blonde from Texas who had claimed the bunk above Sarah's. Her voice carried a slight edge that suggested she was used to being the center of attention. "Phoenix," Sarah replied simply, focusing on organizing her belongings in the small metal locker beside her bed. "Phoenix, huh?" Another woman named Kelly joined the conversation. She was shorter but muscular, with red hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. "You ever done anything like this before, or are you just here because you couldn't figure out what else to do with your life?" Sarah looked up from her unpacking. "I'm here because I want to serve my country." Her voice was calm but firm. This response drew more attention from the other women in the barracks. Some seemed impressed by her straightforward answer, while others exchanged glances that suggested they thought she was being naive or overly serious. "That's sweet," Jessica said with a laugh. "Just wait until you've been here a week. We'll see how patriotic you feel after Williams has you scrubbing toilets with a toothbrush." The first few days at camp were brutal for everyone. Wake-up calls came at 500 hours, followed by immediate physical training, meals eaten in silence, weapons training, classroom instruction, and more physical training. By the end of each day, most recruits collapsed onto their bunks exhausted and sore. Sarah performed well in most activities. She wasn't the fastest runner, but she maintained a steady pace and never gave up. She wasn't the strongest, but she completed every exercise without complaint. What began to irritate some of her fellow recruits was that she never seemed to break down or lose her composure, like many others did. "Look at Miss Perfect over there," Kelly whispered to Jessica during their 3rd evening in the barracks. Sarah was at her bunk, quietly cleaning her rifle while others sat around complaining about the day's hardships. "She acts like this is all so easy." "Maybe she thinks she's better than us," Jessica replied, loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Some people just like to show off." Sarah continued her work without responding, which only seemed to annoy them more. She had learned long ago that actions spoke louder than words, and she was determined to prove herself through her performance, not through arguments or confrontations. The real problems began during the 2nd week of training. During obstacle course exercises, Sarah consistently finished in the top half of the group. During marksmanship training, she hit her targets with impressive accuracy. During hand-to-hand combat drills, she demonstrated techniques that surprised even some of the instructors. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" asked Marcus, one of the male recruits, after Sarah had successfully defended herself against a much larger training partner. "My grandfather taught me some things," Sarah answered modestly, not mentioning that her grandfather had been a decorated Marine who had served in 3 different conflicts and had trained her since she was 12 years old. This success began to breed resentment among some of the other recruits. During meals, Sarah often found herself eating alone as conversations would stop when she approached tables. During free time, groups would form that didn't include her. Some recruits began making subtle comments about her background, suggesting that she must have had special training or advantages that others didn't have. "I heard her family has military connections," someone whispered during equipment inspection. "That's probably how she knows all this stuff already." "No wonder she's showing off," another voice added. "She probably had private trainers or something." The truth was much simpler and more complicated than they imagined. Sarah's grandfather, Miguel Martinez, had indeed been a career military man, but he had grown up poor in a small border town and had worked twice as hard as everyone else to prove himself worthy of respect. He had passed these lessons on to Sarah, along with the skills and discipline that were now serving her well in training. But Sarah never talked about her family background or her grandfather's influence. She believed that her performance should speak for itself, and she didn't want special treatment or recognition based on her family history. This quiet confidence, however, was interpreted by some as arrogance or aloofness. By the end of the second week, the divide in her training group was becoming more apparent. Sarah had earned the respect of some recruits who admired her dedication and skill, but she had also attracted the hostility of others who felt threatened by her competence or annoyed by what they perceived as her superior attitude. The stage was being set for conflicts that would test not only Sarah's physical abilities but also her mental strength and her commitment to her principles. She had come to training camp with dreams of honor and service, but she was discovering that sometimes the biggest battles were fought not against official enemies, but against the prejudices and insecurities of the people who were supposed to be on your side. As she lay on her narrow bunk that night, listening to the whispered conversations around her, Sarah wondered if her grandfather had faced similar challenges during his own military training decades earlier. She closed her eyes and tried to remember his words about perseverance and staying true to yourself, no matter what others might think or say. The third week of training brought new challenges and deeper tensions. Sarah continued to excel in her duties, but the social isolation was becoming more pronounced. During morning formation, she noticed how conversations would stop when she approached and during meals. Finding a seat became increasingly difficult as groups seemed to close ranks against her. "Martinez," Drill Sergeant Williams called out during weapons cleaning inspection. Sarah snapped to attention beside her bunk as he approached, his boots clicking against the concrete floor. The entire barracks fell silent, watching as he examined her rifle with the intensity of a jeweler inspecting a diamond. He turned the weapon over in his hands, checking every surface, every mechanism. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he looked up at Sarah, his expression unreadable. "Outstanding work, recruit," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "This is how a rifle should be maintained. Everyone else take notes." As Williams moved on to inspect other bunks, Sarah could feel the weight of 46 pairs of eyes on her. Some looked impressed, others envious, and a few openly hostile. She kept her eyes forward and her expression neutral. But inside, she felt the familiar knot of anxiety that came with unwanted attention. "Teacher's pet," someone coughed behind her. That evening, the situation escalated. Sarah was returning from the laundry facility when she found her bunk area, surrounded by several recruits. Jessica stood at the center of the group holding something in her hands. "Well, well," Jessica said with a cruel smile. "Look what fell out of Princess Perfect's locker." She was holding a framed photograph that Sarah kept tucked away with her personal items. The picture showed Sarah at her high school graduation, standing proudly next to her grandfather in his old Marine dress uniform, his chest decorated with numerous ribbons and medals. "No wonder she's so good at everything," Kelly chimed in, looking at the photo. "Granddaddy probably taught her all the tricks. Makes sense now why she acts like she's better than everyone else." Sarah stepped forward, her hand extended. "Please give that back. It's personal." "Personal?" Jessica laughed, holding the photo higher. "Nothing's personal here, Martinez. We're all supposed to be equal, remember? But apparently some people get special treatment from birth." A crowd was gathering now, drawn by the commotion. Some recruits looked uncomfortable with what was happening, but others seemed eager to see how the confrontation would unfold. Sarah could see that this had been building for weeks, and now it was coming to a head. "My grandfather has nothing to do with how I perform here," Sarah said calmly, though her heart was racing. "I earn everything through my own effort." "Sure you do," Marcus joined in, though he looked less certain than Jessica and Kelly. "That's why you knew all those combat moves on day one. That's why your rifle is always perfect. That's why Williams treats you differently. He doesn't treat me differently, Sarah replied. He treats everyone according to their performance. Performance? Jessica's voice rose. You mean the performance you learned at home while the rest of us were living normal lives? Some of us didn't have military trainers teaching us everything before we got here. The accusation stung because it contained just enough truth to be complicated. Sarah's grandfather had indeed taught her many things that gave her advantages in training, but he had also taught her about honor, respect, and treating others fairly regardless of their background or abilities. Listen, Sarah said, trying to keep her voice level. I never asked for special treatment, and I don't expect it. I'm here for the same reason you are, to serve my country. Can we please just focus on that? Serve your country? Kelly laughed harshly. Or serve your family legacy? There's a difference, Princess. The conversation was interrupted by the sharp blast of a whistle. What's going on here? Drill Sergeant Rodriguez appeared in the doorway, his eyes scanning the group of recruits clustered around Sarah's bunk. This looks like a social gathering to me, and I don't remember authorizing any social gatherings. The group began to disperse quickly, but Rodriguez held up his hand. Not so fast. Martinez, front and center. Sarah stepped forward, accepting the photograph that Jessica hastily handed back to her. Yes, Drill Sergeant. The rest of you police your own areas. If I see any more unauthorized gatherings, you'll all be doing extra PT until midnight. Clear? Yes, Drill Sergeant. The group responded in unison before scattering to their respective bunks. Rodriguez waited until they were alone before speaking to Sarah in a lower voice. Everything all right here, recruit? Sarah looked at the photo in her hands, then back at the drill sergeant. She could report what had happened, but that would only make things worse. Everything's fine, Drill Sergeant. Just a misunderstanding. Rodriguez studied her face for a moment, and Sarah got the impression that he understood more about the situation than he was letting on. Sometimes misunderstandings can turn into bigger problems if they're not addressed properly, he said carefully. You sure you don't need to clarify anything? I'm sure, Drill Sergeant. Thank you. He nodded slowly. All right then. But Martinez, if any more misunderstandings occur, I want to know about them immediately. Clear? Crystal clear, Drill Sergeant. After Rodriguez left, Sarah sat on her bunk and looked at the photograph. Her grandfather smiled back at her from the frame, his weathered face full of pride and dignity. She remembered the day this picture was taken, how he had told her that the real measure of a soldier wasn't in their medals or ribbons, but in how they treated their fellow service members and how they handled adversity. The barracks remained tense for the rest of the evening. Conversations were conducted in whispers, and Sarah could feel the undercurrent of resentment that hadn't been resolved by the drill sergeant's intervention. If anything, the official attention seemed to have made some people more convinced that she was receiving special treatment. As lights out approached, Sarah made a decision. She quietly approached Jessica's bunk where the other woman was writing in a journal. Can I talk to you for a minute? Sarah asked quietly. Jessica looked up with suspicion. What about? About earlier. About the photo. Sarah sat down on the edge of the bunk. You're right that my grandfather taught me things. He was a Marine for 30 years, and he shared some of that knowledge with me. But he also taught me that being part of a team means supporting each other, not competing against each other. Jessica's expression softened slightly, but she remained guarded. So what are you saying? I'm saying that if you want help with anything, weapons cleaning, combat techniques, whatever, I'm happy to share what I know. We're all trying to get through this together, right? For a moment, it seemed like Jessica might accept the olive branch. Her expression wavered between hostility and something that might have been consideration. But then Kelly's voice cut through the darkness from the next bunk over. Don't fall for it, Jess. She's just trying to make herself look good to the drill sergeants. Princess Perfect wants to be the hero again. Jessica's face hardened and the moment of potential reconciliation passed. Thanks, but no thanks, Martinez. I think we can manage without your charity. Sarah nodded quietly and returned to her own bunk. As she lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of 46 other people trying to sleep, she realized that the challenges she faced here went far beyond physical training or academic learning. She was fighting a battle for acceptance and respect that couldn't be won through superior performance alone. The photograph of her grandfather remained on her small shelf, but now it felt less like an inspiration and more like a burden. Tomorrow would bring new tests, New opportunities to prove herself and quite possibly new conflicts with people who had already decided that she didn't belong among them. The fourth week of training began with an unexpected announcement. During morning formation, Drill Sergeant Williams informed the recruits that they would be participating in a week-long field exercise that would test everything they had learned so far. "This isn't summer camp," Williams announced, his voice carrying across the formation. "You'll be living in the field, eating military rations, and conducting missions that will determine whether you have what it takes to move forward in this program. Some of you will excel, others will wash out. The choice is yours." The field exercise would involve navigation challenges, survival skills, team-building exercises, and simulated combat scenarios. Recruits would be divided into squads of 8 members each, and their performance would be evaluated both individually and as a team. When the squad assignments were announced, Sarah found herself grouped with 7 other recruits, including Jessica and Kelly. She also noticed that some of the male recruits who had been most vocal in their criticism of her were in her squad as well. Marcus, along with 2 others named David and Tyler, completed the group alongside 2 quieter recruits named Amy and Carlos. "Great," Kelly muttered loud enough for Sarah to hear. "Guess we know who's going to try to be squad leader." "I'm not interested in being squad leader," Sarah said quietly. "I just want to do my part." "Sure you don't," Jessica replied with sarcasm. "Miss Perfect always wants to do her part. Problem is, your part usually makes the rest of us look bad." The squad was issued their field equipment and given their first mission briefing. They would be transported to a remote area of the training base where they would need to establish a camp, complete a series of navigation exercises, and work together on various challenges over the next 5 days. As they loaded onto the transport truck, Sarah noticed that the other squad members were already forming smaller groups within the larger team. Jessica, Kelly, and Amy sat together on one side of the truck bed, while Marcus, David, and Tyler clustered on the other side. Carlos, a quiet young man from New Mexico, sat alone near the tailgate, and Sarah took a seat beside him. "You nervous about this?" Carlos asked quietly as the truck bounced along the dirt road toward their destination. "A little," Sarah admitted, "but mostly excited. This is what we've been training for." Carlos nodded. "My older brother went through this same training 3 years ago. He said the field exercise is where you really find out who you can count on." Their conversation was interrupted by Tyler's voice from across the truck bed. "Hey Martinez, you going to call your grandfather for tips on this one too?" The comment drew snickers from Jessica and Marcus, and Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "I don't need tips from anyone," she replied evenly. "Just like everyone else here, I'll figure it out as we go." "Right," David chimed in, "because you're just like everyone else. That's why you always know exactly what to do in every situation." Sarah was about to respond when Carlos spoke up unexpectedly. "You know what? I've been watching Sarah in training, and yeah, she's good at a lot of things. But I've also seen her help people when the drill sergeants weren't looking. She showed me how to properly clean my rifle when I was struggling, and she didn't make a big deal about it or try to get credit for it." This statement seemed to catch the squad off guard. Jessica and Kelly exchanged glances while Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "When did that happen?" Jessica asked. 2 weeks ago," Carlos replied. "I was having trouble during evening inspection and Sarah noticed. She spent her free time helping me figure out what I was doing wrong. She could have just let me fail, but she didn't." An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Sarah appreciated Carlos's support, but she could see that it was creating more tension rather than resolving it. Some squad members looked like they were reconsidering their opinions, while others seemed even more resentful. When they arrived at their destination, the squad was given their first challenge: establish a base camp that would house all 8 members comfortably and securely. They had 4 hours to complete the task before darkness fell. Immediately, disagreements arose about how to approach the challenge. Marcus wanted to take charge and assign specific roles to each member. Jessica argued that they should work in pairs and divide the responsibilities equally. Tyler suggested they just start working and figure things out as they went along. "This is ridiculous," Kelly said after 20 minutes of circular debate. "We're wasting time talking when we should be working." "Maybe we should vote on a squad leader," Amy suggested quietly. It was one of the few times she had spoken since they'd been assigned to the team. "I nominate Marcus," David said immediately. "I nominate Jessica," Kelly countered. Sarah found herself in an awkward position. She had experience with outdoor camping and military protocols that would be useful for establishing the camp, but she knew that volunteering to lead would only increase the resentment against her. At the same time, she could see that the continuing arguments were putting their mission in jeopardy. "Look," she said finally, "we're burning daylight. Why don't we just start with the basics that everyone can agree on? We need shelter, we need a secure perimeter, and we need to organize our supplies. We can work on those things simultaneously and figure out the leadership question later." "There she goes again," Tyler muttered. "Always has the answers," but Carlos nodded in agreement. "Sarah's right. We can argue about who's in charge after we have a place to sleep tonight." Reluctantly, the squad began to work. Sarah found herself naturally taking on tasks that others seemed uncertain about, but she tried to do so quietly and without giving orders to anyone else. When she noticed that Jessica was struggling with setting up her portion of the shelter, Sarah moved over to help without saying anything. "I don't need your help," Jessica said defensively. "I know you don't," Sarah replied, "but 2 people can do this faster than 1, and we're running short on time." For a moment, Jessica looked like she might refuse the assistance, but as the sun continued to sink toward the horizon, practicality won out over pride. "Fine, but don't think this changes anything between us." "I wouldn't expect it to," Sarah said simply, and began helping to secure the shelter stakes. As they worked together, Sarah noticed that Jessica was actually quite capable and organized. Her initial difficulties had come from unfamiliarity with the equipment, rather than any lack of skill or intelligence. Within 30 minutes, their section of the camp was not only complete, but also more secure and well-organized than some of the other areas. "Not bad," Jessica admitted grudgingly as they stepped back to admire their work. By the time darkness fell, the squad had managed to establish a functional base camp. It wasn't perfect, and there had been several more arguments and conflicts throughout the afternoon, but they had completed their first challenge successfully. As they sat around their small camp stove eating military rations, the dynamics within the squad were clearly still unsettled. Some members seemed to be grudgingly recognizing Sarah's contributions, while others remained suspicious of her motives. The field exercise was only beginning, and Sarah sensed that the real tests of teamwork and character were still ahead of them. That night, as she lay in her sleeping bag listening to the sounds of the wilderness around them, Sarah wondered whether 5 days would be enough time to prove to her squad mates that she was truly on their side, or whether the prejudices and resentments that had built up over the previous weeks were too deep to overcome. The second day of the field exercise brought their most challenging test yet. The squad was given a navigation mission that required them to reach 3 different checkpoints, spread across 15 miles of rough terrain, collect specific items at each location, and return to base camp before sunset. Failure to complete the mission would result in the entire squad being placed on probation status. "This is where we separate the real soldiers from the wannabes," Drill Sergeant Rodriguez announced as he handed Marcus the mission briefing and compass. "You have exactly 10 hours. Use them wisely." As soon as Rodriguez disappeared into the forest, the squad gathered around Marcus to study the map and plan their route. The 3 checkpoints formed a rough triangle, with their base camp at the center. Each checkpoint was marked only by grid coordinates, and the terrain between them included dense woods, rocky hills, and at least 1 creek crossing. "Okay," Marcus said, spreading the map on a flat rock. "We need to figure out the most efficient route. If we go clockwise, we hit checkpoint Alpha first, then Bravo, then Charlie. But that route takes us through the steepest terrain," David pointed out. "Maybe we should go counterclockwise instead." "The counterclockwise route is longer," Jessica argued. "We'll be walking an extra 3 miles at least." Sarah studied the map quietly, noting several features that the others seemed to be overlooking. There was a trail marked in faded ink that could save them significant time, and the creek crossing would be much easier at one location than another, based on the topographical markings. "What do you think, Carlos?" Marcus asked. It was clear he was trying to include everyone in the decision-making process, which Sarah appreciated. "I think we should listen to what everyone has to say before we decide," Carlos replied diplomatically. Marcus looked around the group. "Anyone else have thoughts?" "Sarah, you've been pretty quiet." All eyes turned to Sarah, and she could feel the familiar tension of being put on the spot. She knew her input could be valuable, but she also knew that anything she said would be scrutinized for signs of showing off or taking charge. "Well," she said carefully, I noticed there's an old hunting trail marked here. She pointed to the faded line on the map. If it's still passable, it could save us a lot of time getting to checkpoint Alpha. And the creek crossing looks like it might be easier here rather than here. She indicated the two possible crossing points. How do you know about hunting trails? Tyler asked with suspicion. More grandfather training? Sarah felt a flash of frustration but kept her voice level. I've done a lot of hiking and camping. You learn to read topographical maps when you spend time outdoors. Of course you have, Kelly muttered. Is there anything you haven't done? Actually, yes, Sarah replied, surprising everyone with her directness. I've never had to work with a team that seemed determined to distrust everything I say. That's a new experience for me. An uncomfortable silence fell over the group. Amy shifted nervously while Carlos looked sympathetic. Marcus cleared his throat. Look, we don't have time for personal issues right now, Marcus said firmly. We need to make a decision and get moving. Sarah's suggestions make sense based on what I can see on the map. Unless someone has a better idea, that's the route we're taking. Jessica looked like she wanted to argue, but David nodded in agreement. Marcus is right. We're burning time and Sarah's route looks solid. With the route decided, the squad packed their gear and set out. Sarah deliberately positioned herself in the middle of the group, trying to avoid both leading and lagging behind. She noticed that Carlos stayed near her, while Jessica and Kelly walked together ahead of them, occasionally glancing back with expressions she couldn't quite read. The first part of the journey went smoothly. Sarah's hunting trail proved to be exactly where she had predicted, and though it was overgrown in places, it did save them considerable time and effort. When they reached Checkpoint Alpha, they were actually ahead of schedule. Nice call on that trail, Marcus said to Sarah as they collected their required item, a sealed envelope marked with their squad number. Thanks, Sarah replied simply, but she noticed that several squad members seemed genuinely impressed rather than resentful. The route to Checkpoint Bravo proved more challenging. The terrain was steep and rocky, and about halfway there, Amy twisted her ankle on loose stones. She tried to hide the injury at first, but it was clear she was struggling to keep up. I'm fine, Amy insisted when Marcus asked if she needed to rest. Just stepped wrong. It's nothing. But Sarah could see that Amy was favoring her left foot and wincing with each step. The squad was faced with a difficult decision. Push Amy to continue at the risk of making her injury worse or slow down the entire team to accommodate her limitations. We should take a break, Sarah suggested. Let's assess the injury properly and figure out our options. We don't have time for breaks, Tyler protested. We're already behind schedule and we still have 2 more checkpoints. Actually, we're ahead of schedule, Carlos pointed out. Sarah's trail saved us almost an hour. Jessica knelt down beside Amy and gently examined her ankle. It's swollen, she announced. Not badly, but enough that it's going to slow her down. So what do we do? David asked. Leave someone here with her while the rest of us continue. We don't leave anyone behind, Sarah said firmly. That's not how teams work. Easy for you to say, Kelly snapped. You're not the one with a twisted ankle slowing everyone down. Sarah stood up and walked over to Amy. Can you walk on it at all? She asked gently. A little, Amy admitted. It hurts, but I think I can manage if we go slowly. Sarah looked around at the squad members, then made a decision that surprised everyone. She pulled off her backpack and began redistributing Amy's gear among the other squad members. What are you doing? Marcus asked. Lightening Amy's load so she can focus on walking without making her injury worse, Sarah explained. We can all carry a little extra weight. It's better than risking permanent damage to her ankle. I can carry my own gear, Amy protested weakly. I know you can, Sarah replied, but you don't have to. We're a team, remember? To her surprise, Jessica was the first to offer to take some of Amy's equipment. Sarah's right, she said. We look out for each other. One by one, the other squad members stepped forward to take portions of Amy's gear. Even Tyler, despite his earlier complaints about time pressure, accepted part of the load without further protest. The journey to Checkpoint Bravo took longer than planned, but they managed to maintain a steady pace that Amy could handle. Sarah found herself naturally taking point, using her navigation skills to find the easiest path through the difficult terrain. For the first time since the exercise began, the squad seemed to be working together rather than against each other. When they reached Checkpoint Bravo, They discovered their second challenge wasn't just collecting an item. They had to solve a puzzle that required input from all 8 squad members. The checkpoint contained a locked box with 8 different combination locks, and the squad had to find the correct 8-digit sequence using clues hidden around the area. "This is going to take forever," David groaned as they surveyed the puzzle. "Not if we work systematically," Sarah suggested. "Let's divide into pairs and search different areas for clues. Then we'll pool our information and solve it together." For the first time all day, no one questioned her suggestion. The squad split into 4 pairs and began searching. Sarah found herself partnered with Jessica, who seemed more willing to communicate now that they had a specific task to focus on. "You know," Jessica said as they searched through a pile of camouflaged markers, "you were right about taking care of Amy. I probably would have just told her to tough it out." "Sometimes toughing it out isn't the best strategy," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the smart thing is to adapt and find a better way." Jessica nodded thoughtfully. "Is that something your grandfather taught you too?" Sarah considered the question. "Actually, that's something I learned from failing. I used to think that being strong meant never asking for help or admitting when something was too difficult. It took me a long time to figure out that real strength sometimes means knowing when to change your approach." As they continued searching, Sarah wondered if perhaps she was finally beginning to earn the trust and respect of her squad mates, not through superior performance, but through demonstrating that she truly cared about their success as a team. The puzzle at Checkpoint Bravo proved more complex than anyone had anticipated. After 45 minutes of searching and comparing clues, the squad had managed to unlock 6 of the 8 combination locks. But the final 2 sequences remained elusive. Time was running short and the pressure was mounting. "This is impossible," Tyler said, frustration evident in his voice. "We've looked everywhere twice. Maybe some of the clues are missing." "They're not missing," Sarah said quietly, studying the pattern of numbers they had already discovered. "We're just not seeing the connection yet." "Well, if you have any brilliant insights, now would be a good time to share them," Kelly said, but her tone lacked the hostility it had carried earlier in the week. Sarah looked at the 6 unlocked combinations again. 1847, 2916, 3485, 4684, 1523, and 6792. Something about the pattern nagged at her, but she couldn't quite grasp it. "Let me see those clues again," Amy said from where she sat resting her ankle against a tree stump. Despite her injury, she had insisted on helping with the puzzle. Carlos handed her the small cards they had found hidden around the checkpoint. Each card contained a seemingly random set of symbols and numbers. Amy studied them carefully, then looked at the opened locks. "Wait a minute," Amy said slowly. "What if these aren't just random numbers? What if they're dates?" "Dates?" Marcus asked, leaning over to look at the cards. "Look at this," Amy continued, excitement growing in her voice. 1847 could be 1847 or 1847. Same with the others. But if they're years, she paused, calculating in her head. These are all years when major military battles took place. Sarah felt a surge of understanding. Amy's right. 1847 was the Mexican-American War, and 1916, she thought for a moment, World War I. So the missing 2 numbers would be years of other major conflicts, Jessica said, catching on quickly. "What major wars are we missing?" David asked. The squad began calling out possibilities. Civil War, World War II, Korean War, Vietnam. "Wait," Sarah said, holding up her hand. "Let's think about this systematically. What pattern do the years we have follow?" Carlos spread the unlocked combinations out in chronological order. 1847, 1916, then it jumps around. Maybe it's not chronological. Maybe it's something else. Sarah studied the numbers again, then suddenly her eyes widened. It's not about the wars themselves. Look at the last 2 digits of each year. 47, 16, 85, 54, 23, 92. They're counting down and up in a specific pattern. "I don't see it," Marcus admitted. "The pattern is based on military history, but it's also mathematical," Sarah explained. Each number relates to a specific founding date of military branches or important military academies. We need 1775 for the Army and 1636 for the National Guard. Working quickly, they input the 2 remaining combinations. The final lock clicked open with a satisfying sound, and inside the box they found their second required item, along with coordinates for the final checkpoint. Outstanding work, everyone, Marcus said, genuine admiration in his voice. That was solid teamwork. As they prepared to leave Checkpoint Bravo, Sarah noticed that the dynamics of the squad had shifted noticeably. People were talking to her more naturally, and the conversations included her rather than stopping when she approached. Even Tyler seemed to have dropped his constant suspicion. The route to Checkpoint Charlie took them through the most challenging terrain yet. They had to navigate down a steep ravine, cross the creek Sarah had identified on the map, and then climb up the opposite side. Amy's ankle was holding up better than expected, but the difficult terrain slowed their progress significantly. Halfway down the ravine, disaster struck. David, who had been carrying extra weight from Amy's pack, lost his footing on a loose rock. He tumbled several feet down the slope before catching himself against a tree, but in the process he dropped his rifle. The weapon bounced and clattered down the rocky slope, coming to rest in a crevice about 20 feet below their position. "My rifle," David called out, starting to scramble down after it. "Stop," Sarah called sharply. "That slope is too unstable. You'll just make it worse." David paused, clearly torn between following orders and recovering his weapon. Everyone in the squad knew that losing a rifle was a serious offense that could result in immediate dismissal from the program. "We have to get it back," David said desperately. "I can't finish training without my weapon." Sarah studied the terrain carefully. The slope was indeed dangerous. Loose rocks and unstable soil that could easily cause a serious fall. But the rifle was wedged in a position where it might be retrieved if someone approached it from a different angle. "There's another way down about 50 yards to our left," she observed. "The slope is more stable there, and we can approach the rifle from below instead of above." "That'll take us way off our route," Tyler pointed out. "We're already running behind schedule." "So what?" Carlos said firmly. "We don't leave David's rifle behind, and we don't risk someone getting hurt trying to retrieve it the dangerous way." Jessica nodded in agreement. "Carlos is right. We stick together and we all finish together, or we don't finish at all." The detour to recover David's rifle took them an additional hour, but they managed to retrieve it safely. David was clearly grateful, and even more importantly, Sarah noticed that the squad had made the decision collectively, rather than looking to any one person for leadership. When they finally reached Checkpoint Charlie, they discovered their final challenge was the most demanding yet. The checkpoint contained not just an item to collect, but also a message that had to be decoded using skills from their classroom training. The decoded message would give them the location of their actual objective, a cache hidden somewhere within a half-mile radius of the checkpoint. "This is like a treasure hunt," Amy said, examining the coded message. "But the code is more complex than anything we practiced in class." The squad spread out the message and began working on it together. Sarah recognized it as a variation of a substitution cipher, but with additional complications that made it challenging even for someone with her background. As they worked, she noticed Kelly watching her closely. "You know," Kelly said quietly, "I owe you an apology. I've been giving you a hard time because I thought you were trying to show off or make the rest of us look bad. But today I've seen that you're actually trying to help all of us succeed." "You don't owe me anything," Sarah replied. "We all want the same thing, to get through this training and become good soldiers." "Maybe," Kelly said, "but I was wrong about your motivations. I let my own insecurities make me suspicious of you when I should have been grateful for your help." The conversation was interrupted by Marcus calling out excitedly, "I think I've got part of the message decoded. It's definitely giving us directions to a specific location." The squad gathered around as Marcus explained his progress. With everyone contributing their knowledge and skills, they managed to decode the complete message within 30 minutes. The cache was hidden near a distinctive rock formation about 400 yards north of their current position. Finding the cache required careful navigation and teamwork. The rock formation was larger and more complex than they had expected, with numerous hiding places where the cache could be concealed. They had to search systematically, communicating constantly to avoid duplicating efforts. "Found it," Amy called out from behind a boulder. She held up a sealed container marked with their squad number. Inside the container, they discovered not just the final required item for their mission, but also a note of congratulations and instructions for their return journey. They had successfully completed all 3 checkpoints with time to spare. As they began the trek back to base camp, Sarah felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond just completing the mission. For the first time since arriving at training camp, she felt like she was truly part of a team. The barriers of suspicion and resentment that had divided the squad were finally beginning to break down. "You know what?" Jessica said as they walked together through the forest. "I think we might actually be pretty good at this soldier thing." "I think you're right," Sarah agreed, smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. But as they approached their base camp in the fading light of evening, none of them could have anticipated that their biggest test was still ahead of them, and it would require not just teamwork and military skills, but also a revelation that would change how everyone saw Sarah Martinez forever. The final day of the field exercise dawned gray and overcast, with thick clouds promising rain before evening. Sarah's squad had returned to base camp the previous night in high spirits, having successfully completed their navigation mission and feeling more unified than they had since the exercise began. But their celebration was short-lived. At 600 hours, Drill Sergeant Williams appeared at their camp with news that changed everything. "Listen up, soldiers. We've received word that there's been a simulated enemy infiltration in Sector 7. Your squad, along with 2 others, has been assigned to conduct a search and rescue operation. This is not a drill within a drill. This exercise will determine your final grades for field training." He handed Marcus a sealed envelope containing their mission briefing. "You have 1 hour to plan and prepare. Your objective is to locate and extract 2 wounded personnel who are trapped behind enemy lines. The scenario is as realistic as we can make it, which means you'll be facing live opposition forces, simulated weapons fire, and real obstacles. Anyone who wants to withdraw from this exercise may do so now without penalty to their overall training record." Sarah looked around at her squad mates. Despite the intimidating nature of the mission, no one stepped forward to withdraw. The bonds they had formed over the past few days had created a commitment that went beyond individual concerns. "Outstanding," Williams continued. "You'll be working with Alpha Squad and Charlie Squad, but each team will have different insertion points and objectives. Success depends not just on completing your individual mission, but on coordinating with the other squads effectively." After Williams departed, the squad gathered around Marcus as he opened the mission briefing. The scenario was indeed complex. 2 casualties were trapped in a compound approximately 2 miles from their current position. The compound was defended by an unknown number of opposition forces equipped with paint-round weapons that would simulate live fire. Getting hit by a paint round would result in simulated injury or death, effectively removing that person from the exercise. "This is the real deal," Marcus said, studying the tactical map included in the briefing. "Everything we've learned over the past month comes down to the next few hours." Sarah examined the map over his shoulder, noting the terrain features and possible approach routes to the target compound. Her grandfather's lessons about tactical planning came flooding back, but she hesitated to voice her observations too quickly. The squad dynamics had improved significantly, but she didn't want to risk appearing to take over the leadership role that Marcus had been handling well. "What are you thinking, Sarah?" Jessica asked, noticing her concentration on the map. The question surprised Sarah, not just because Jessica had asked, but because her tone was genuinely interested rather than challenging. "Well," Sarah said carefully, "there are 3 main approaches to the compound. The direct route is fastest but also most exposed. The eastern approach offers better cover but requires crossing open ground here." She pointed to a section of the map. "The western route is longest but might give us the element of surprise. What would you recommend?" Marcus asked, and Sarah realized he was genuinely seeking her tactical input rather than just being polite. Sarah studied the map more carefully, considering not just the terrain, but also the likely placement of opposition forces and the coordination requirements with the other squads. "I think we should consider a 2-pronged approach, split into smaller teams. One creates a distraction while the other moves in for the actual extraction." "That's risky," David pointed out. "If one team gets pinned down, the other might not be able to help." "All the options are risky," Carlos observed. "But Sarah's approach might give us the best chance of success." Tyler nodded in agreement. "Plus it plays to our strengths. We've gotten pretty good at working together in smaller groups." As they continued planning, Sarah found herself naturally taking on more of a leadership role in the tactical discussion. But instead of the resentment she had expected, Her squad mates seemed to welcome her input and expertise. Marcus remained the official squad leader, but he made it clear that he valued Sarah's strategic thinking. "All right," Marcus said after 30 minutes of planning. "Here's what we're going to do. Sarah, Kelly, and Amy will form Team Alpha and approach from the west. The rest of us will be Team Bravo and create a distraction from the east. Once Team Alpha is in position, Team Bravo will initiate contact and draw the opposition's attention. Team Alpha will then move in for the extraction." The plan was solid, but Sarah felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. This exercise would put her in a position where her actions could directly impact the success or failure of her entire squad. The pressure was intense but also strangely familiar. It reminded her of the stories her grandfather had told about real combat situations where split-second decisions meant the difference between mission, success, and disaster, as they prepared their equipment and applied camouflage paint to their faces. Sarah noticed that her hands were steady and her mind was clear. The doubts and social anxieties that had plagued her throughout training seemed to fade away, replaced by a focused determination she recognized from her most challenging moments in civilian life. "You ready for this?" Kelly asked as they prepared to move out. "As ready as I can be," Sarah replied. "What about you?" "How's your ankle, Amy?" "It's fine," Amy said, testing her weight on the injured foot. "I won't slow you down." The movement to their insertion point took 40 minutes of careful navigation through dense forest. Sarah found herself naturally taking point, using the terrain reading skills her grandfather had taught her to find the safest and most concealed route. Kelly and Amy followed closely behind, trusting her judgment completely. As they approached their target area, Sarah held up a closed fist, the signal to halt and take cover. Through the trees ahead, she could see the compound, a collection of temporary structures surrounded by a chain-link fence. More importantly, she could see movement that indicated the positions of at least 4 opposition force members. Using hand signals, she communicated her observations to Kelly and Amy. The opposition forces were positioned exactly as she had anticipated, based on the terrain analysis. Their plan would work, but the timing would have to be perfect. Sarah activated her radio and whispered into the microphone, "Team Bravo, this is Team Alpha. We're in position and ready to execute. Opposition forces visible at 2, 4, and 7 o'clock from the main entrance. Recommend you initiate from the northeast corner in 5 minutes." "Copy, Team Alpha." Marcus's voice crackled back through the radio. "Team Bravo moving into position now. Initiating contact in 5 minutes." As they waited for the distraction to begin, Sarah felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. This was the moment that would define not just her performance in the exercise, but also her relationship with her squad and her future in the military. Everything she had learned, from her grandfather's lessons to her own experiences over the past month of training, had led to this moment. The sound of simulated gunfire erupted from the eastern side of the compound, followed by shouts and the noise of opposition forces repositioning to meet the threat. It was time to move. "Let's go," Sarah whispered, and Team Alpha began their final approach to complete the most important mission of their training. Team Alpha moved through the forest with practiced stealth, using the distraction from Team Bravo to approach the compound's western perimeter. Sarah led the way, her senses heightened and her training taking over completely. Every shadow, every sound, every movement was processed and analyzed as they closed in on their objective. The simulated gunfire from the eastern side of the compound continued, indicating that Marcus and his team were successfully holding the attention of the opposition forces. Through her radio earpiece, Sarah could hear fragments of communication between the other squads, coordinating their movements and reporting enemy positions. As they reached the chain-link fence surrounding the compound, Sarah spotted their first real challenge. One opposition force member had remained at the western perimeter, positioned behind a concrete barrier with a clear view of the area they needed to cross. Taking him out would require precision and stealth. Using hand signals, Sarah indicated the guard's position to Kelly and Amy. She then pointed to herself and made a circling motion, indicating that she would move around to flank the guard while they provided cover from their current position. Kelly grabbed Sarah's arm and shook her head, pointing to herself instead. She was volunteering to take the more dangerous flanking maneuver. Sarah appreciated the gesture, but she knew that her training and experience made her the better choice for this particular task. She shook her head and pointed to herself again, then to her eyes and ears, indicating that she had the best skills for this type of stealth approach. After a moment's hesitation, Kelly nodded and settled into a covering position. Sarah began her movement around the guard's position, staying low and using every piece of available cover. Her grandfather's lessons about patience and observation guided her as she found a route that would allow her to approach unseen. The key was timing. She had to move when the guard's attention was focused on the ongoing firefight to the east. It took nearly 10 minutes, but Sarah managed to position herself behind the guard's concrete barrier. She could hear him talking into his radio, reporting on the status of the eastern engagement. When he paused to listen to her response, Sarah made her move. She approached silently from behind and tapped the guard on the shoulder with her training weapon. "You're neutralized," she whispered. The opposition force member looked surprised, then impressed, as he acknowledged his simulated elimination and withdrew from the exercise. With the perimeter guard eliminated, Team Alpha was able to breach the compound fence and move toward the building where the wounded personnel were supposedly trapped. But as they approached the structure, Sarah realized that the scenario was more complex than their briefing had indicated. The building had multiple entrances, and there were sounds of movement inside that suggested additional opposition forces. Worse, the continuing firefight outside meant that their time window was limited. Eventually, Team Bravo would be forced to withdraw or risk being overrun. "We need to move fast," Amy whispered as they took cover beside the building's main entrance. Sarah studied the structure, noting the windows, doors, and other features that might affect their approach. Something about the building's layout nagged at her, but she couldn't immediately identify what was bothering her. Then she saw it, a small symbol carved into the concrete beside one of the side doors. It was barely visible, but Sarah recognized it immediately. It was a marking her grandfather had taught her about, used by military units to indicate safe passages or hidden routes. "This way," she whispered to Kelly and Amy, leading them toward the marked door instead of the obvious main entrance. The side door was unlocked, and it led into a narrow corridor that bypassed the main areas of the building, where opposition forces were likely positioned. Sarah's instinct about the marking proved correct. It was guiding them toward a safer route to their objective. As they moved through the building, Sarah found herself drawing on every lesson her grandfather had ever taught her about urban combat and building clearing. She knew how to read the architecture, how to anticipate where defenders would position themselves, and how to move through hostile territory without being detected. They found the first wounded person in a room at the end of the corridor. It was a training instructor playing the role of an injured soldier, complete with realistic makeup and props to simulate battle wounds. 2 opposition forces in the next room, the instructor whispered as Sarah and her team prepared to extract him. "They don't know you're here yet, but they're expecting someone to come for me." Sarah quickly assessed the situation. They had found one of their objectives, but they still needed to locate the second casualty while avoiding the guards. The sounds of battle outside were intensifying, which meant their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. "Kelly, help me move him," Sarah whispered. "Amy, watch the corridor and be ready to provide cover if we run into trouble." As they carefully lifted the simulated casualty and began moving toward their extraction route, Sarah heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the main part of the building. The opposition forces were beginning to search for them. They managed to get the first casualty outside and to a safe position before returning for the second objective. But this time, the building was actively being searched, and stealth would be much more difficult. "Different approach this time," Sarah whispered as they prepared to re-enter the building. "Amy, you and Kelly create a distraction at the front entrance. I'll go in through the side and locate the second casualty." "That's too dangerous," Kelly protested. "You'll be going in alone." "It's the best option we have," Sarah replied. "Trust me." As Kelly and Amy moved to create their distraction, Sarah slipped back into the building through the marked side door. This time she had to move much more carefully, as she could hear opposition forces moving through the corridors and rooms. Searching for intruders, she found the second casualty in a room on the opposite side of the building from where they had found the first one. But this time, there were 2 guards positioned outside the room, and Sarah realized that a direct approach would be impossible. Looking around, she noticed a ventilation grate near the ceiling. It was a long shot, but it might provide access to the room without having to go through the guarded corridor. Sarah climbed onto a desk and carefully removed the grate, trying to make as little noise as possible. The ventilation shaft was narrow and uncomfortable, but it led directly over the room where the second casualty was located. From inside the ventilation system, Sarah could see into the room below. The second wounded person was there, but so was another opposition force member, who had been positioned inside the room as a final challenge. Sarah realized that she would have to drop down into the room and neutralize the guard before she could extract the casualty. It would require perfect timing and execution. If she made any mistakes, the entire mission would fail. Taking a deep breath, Sarah positioned herself over the guard and dropped silently from the ceiling. She landed behind the opposition force member and immediately simulated neutralizing him with her training weapon. "Impressive," the guard said with genuine admiration as he acknowledged his elimination. "I never heard you coming." The second casualty turned out to be Commander Patricia Hayes, the base's senior training officer. Sarah had never seen the commander before, but her reputation was legendary among the recruits. "Outstanding work, recruit," Commander Hayes said, as Sarah prepared to help her to the extraction point. "Your tactical approach to this scenario has been exemplary." As they prepared to leave the building, Commander Hayes stopped Sarah with a hand on her arm. "Before we go, I need to ask you something. That symbol you followed to find the side entrance, where did you learn to recognize military route markings like that?" Sarah hesitated. She had avoided talking about her grandfather's extensive military background throughout her training, not wanting to draw additional attention or accusations of special treatment. "My grandfather taught me, ma'am," Sarah replied quietly. "He served for 30 years and shared some of his knowledge with me." Commander Hayes nodded thoughtfully. "What was your grandfather's name, recruit?" "Miguel Martinez, ma'am. Master Sergeant Miguel Martinez retired." Commander Hayes's expression changed dramatically. Her eyes widened and she stared at Sarah with a mixture of surprise and something approaching awe. "Turn around," Commander Hayes said quietly. "Ma'am." Sarah wasn't sure she had heard correctly. "Turn around, recruit. I need to see your back." Confused but following orders, Sarah turned around. Commander Hayes lifted the back of Sarah's uniform shirt slightly, revealing the top portion of an intricate tattoo that covered most of Sarah's back. The tattoo was a detailed military memorial piece featuring the names, dates, and unit insignia of soldiers who had died in combat. But at the center of the design was a specific symbol, the distinctive unit patch of an elite special operations team that had served with distinction in 3 different conflicts. Commander Hayes's face had gone completely pale. She stared at the tattoo as if seeing a ghost. "Dear God," she whispered. "You're Miguel Martinez's granddaughter." "The Miguel Martinez, Shadow Team Leader Martinez." Sarah nodded, still not understanding why Commander Hayes looked so shocked. "Recruit Martinez," Commander Hayes said, her voice filled with emotion. "Your grandfather saved my life in Afghanistan 15 years ago. I was a young lieutenant trapped behind enemy lines, and Master Sergeant Martinez led a rescue mission that extracted me and 3 other soldiers under impossible circumstances. He was awarded the Silver Star for that operation." The revelation hung in the air between them as the sounds of the ongoing training exercise continued outside. Sarah had known her grandfather was a decorated soldier, but she had never known the specific details of his combat service. "The tattoo," Commander Hayes continued, "those names, they're his team members who didn't make it home, aren't they?" "Yes, ma'am," Sarah replied softly. "He had me get the tattoo when I turned 18. He said it was important to remember those who gave everything for their country and their brothers in arms." Commander Hayes was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the emotional impact of this unexpected connection to her past. "Your grandfather never told you about the rescue in Afghanistan, did he?" she asked finally. "No, ma'am. He never talked about his combat operations. He said some stories were meant to stay with the people who lived them." "That sounds like Miguel Martinez," Commander Hayes said with a slight smile. "Always humble, always focused on others rather than his own heroics." The radio crackled to life, reminding them that the exercise was still ongoing. "We need to complete this extraction," Commander Hayes said, returning to her role as the simulated casualty. "But Recruit Martinez, after this exercise is over, I want to speak with you privately. There are things about your grandfather's service that you should know." As they made their way to the extraction point where Kelly and Amy were waiting, Sarah felt a profound shift in how she understood both her grandfather's legacy and her own place in the military. The tattoo on her back, which she had kept hidden throughout training, was more than just a memorial. It was a connection to a story of heroism and sacrifice that directly touched the life of the woman who was now responsible for training the next generation of soldiers. The exercise concluded successfully, with all 3 squads completing their objectives and earning commendation for their performance. But for Sarah, the real victory was not in the successful completion of the mission, but in the moment when her hidden connection to military history had been revealed to someone who truly understood its significance. As her squad celebrated their success and the barriers of suspicion and resentment finally crumbled completely, Sarah realized that sometimes the most important battles were not the ones you fought with weapons, but the ones you fought to prove your worth, earn respect, and honor the memory of those who came before you.